Hello foliage family, my name is Romani, the mother of leafy boys, and today we're going to be looking at my top 10 low light plants. So the goal of today's video is to hopefully show you some low light house plants that maybe you haven't exactly seen before. I'm trying to keep them a little bit more unusual, a little bit more uncommon, not necessarily like rare or expensive, but just ones that are not your like ZZ snake plant, your like bog standard typical low light plant, something a little bit different. First, I just want to explain what I mean when I say low light, specifically because I think the plants that I'm going to be looking at today are low to maybe like medium light. They would be happier in more of a medium light. They could deal with some low light as well. Low light obviously does not mean no light. You cannot put your plant in somewhere that absolutely is not going to get any light at any point of the day because they are going to die. They are plants. If you want to put something in a super dark corner, get a plastic plant or get like a statue or something like that, but plants will still need light. These are just plants that will deal with your less ideal light and more of a shadowy location. So firstly, when you're looking at any of my windows, or if I'm telling you if it's a south or a north or east window, I do live in Australia. So I live in the southern hemisphere, and I feel like most of the people that go to my videos are from the northern hemisphere, so there might be a little bit of confusion on like what that light looks like for me through that kind of window. So I'm going to put a diagram here, and this is a typical diagram for someone who's living in the northern hemisphere for what your light typically is. You'll see on the diagram there that the south light they've put as like the best possible light for your plants. For me, that's the opposite. The north light is actually my best light along with my east. So the light that I'm getting from my north window over here and my east window behind me are actually some of the best light that I have in my house. I don't get a lot of light through my south windows or through my west windows. So just to keep that in context, the light here works a little bit differently because I'm in a different hemisphere. So hopefully that makes sense. This graphic here is made by We the Wild, and I find it probably the best graphic to describe like levels of light. So if you're really close to the window, obviously you're going to get bright light or bright direct light, which means the light is physically hitting the leaves. You can see beams of light hitting the plant. That is direct light, the brightest light you can get indoors. Moving into like beside your windows or around the direct beams of light is where you would be getting your bright indirect light, which is what pretty much every plant tag says that the plant prefers, which is most likely true. Even though the plants I'm going to show you today can live in lower light, some of them would also prefer to be living in bright and direct light. That's just the nature of plants. But some plants also prefer living in slightly more lower light or medium light due to the fact that they're a crawler or a plant that lives on the forest floor naturally. So that brings us to plants that like medium light. Medium light is when you're moving, meter or more away from your window now. The shadows being cast on the wall behind the plant are a little bit more foggy, a little bit more blurry, and that's where you know that you're heading into more of a medium light rather than a bright and direct light. Moving on to the last one, which is low light. These are areas where you don't really have any shadows on the wall, but it is still bright enough for you to essentially read by. If you can sit in that corner and read, probably not comfortably, you would want to probably put a light on. But if you can sit there and you can read in that space, then you're probably in a low light area. If you're struggling to read or it's going to hurt your eyes to read in this location, then I would say it's probably going to hurt your plants to live in this location. I hope that's a good way of describing it for you, but this is how I decide whether or not I can actually put a plant in this location. Hopefully that gives you a little bit of a guide or a basis for what I'm talking about when I'm talking about medium or low light when it comes to where these plants actually live. Speaking of, the first plant that I want to show you is this beautiful begonia. I believe it's a Begonia Sophie Cecile. and it has the most beautiful shape of the leaves. I have, I think, 3 of these now in various locations because they're such good filler plants, because they just are so adaptable. This can definitely be a low light plant, but it also can be a bright direct light plant, which is why I love it so much. It was actually growing in our garden when we first moved into this house. So growing outside in a random garden bed, getting full direct beams of light, loving its life, massive leaves. I took a couple of pieces off and I've got one growing downstairs and one growing upstairs, and both of them that are growing inside are like shoved at the bottom and like in like low light kind of areas. I definitely would say that these are in low light, not medium light, because they are definitely shoved into a corner just to fill the space. I think something that lets you know that a plant possibly could be a low light plant, or a plant that might tolerate being in low light, is the darkness of the leaves. And you can see these leaves are quite dark, quite moody. And so that is why I initially thought maybe it could grow in low light because of the leaf color. And yeah, it's been fine. It's even got some pups growing there. Seems to be super happy. It's in a relatively small pot, but again, it was just growing from a single cutting. And even with not a lot of roots in there, it still seems to be fairly happy. It will go a little bit yellow and gross if you let it sit in water. So weirdly, for a begonia, this one does like to almost completely dry out before I water it again. That may be because it's not very established in the pot, so it's a little bit more prone to get a soggy foot if it's really not established in the pot yet. That will probably change once it's really filled out the pot, because you can see there's no real roots around the edge of the pot, so that might change a little bit later. But for now, I water it probably every 2 weeks, maybe a little bit less than that even, and it seems to be super duper happy. All right, let's move on to the next. This next one is a Pellionia Pulchra. I think that's how you say it, Pellionia. It is just from up above my head over here. Again, the window that brings light into the space that we're in right now is a north-facing window, but it is pulled right back from the window, so it doesn't actually get a lot of light. It's very much ambient light. I would say more medium-ish light, but still not a heap. But because it has such dark foliage, it doesn't seem to mind. I'd say it probably would grow a little bit faster if I gave it a bit more light, but for the most part, I don't mind that it's not growing incredibly quickly. It's not that it's not growing. If it was not growing, I might be concerned, but it is still actually actively growing. It's just not growing like incredibly fast like a weed. But this one does not like to sit in water. I have it with a little cup in the bottom that keeps it from sitting on the actual bottom of the pot. So when I water it through in place, water sits in the bottom of the pot. If it's thirsty, it chucks out roots into the water reservoir that I've essentially made for it. And it means that it can keep drinking without getting sort of like a soggy wet foot and get root rot. I think a really big cause for plants living in low light eventually dying or very quickly dying is that people don't adapt their watering cycle. I have been known to do this. I'll move a plant to a lower light and I'll keep watering it at the same time I used to, and it rots and it dies very quickly. So something that I always do when I am transitioning a plant to a lower light area, especially if I've picked it up from a nursery where it was probably in a fair bit of light if it was at a nursery, is I try and give it a little bit of light, more light than I really want to give it for the first couple of weeks to a couple of months, and slowly move it back to where I want it to live, slowly like change its location But I don't do that over a space of, 1 week to the next. It should be a few weeks to a few months in between to give it enough time to actually settle in and build like a little bit of strength back from the transition from coming from a nursery into your own home. Once I feel like I can move it into that lower light area, I should also be lowering the amount of water that I give it. In a higher light, it's going to drink that water faster, whether in lower light, it's not going to. So I want to be really, really careful and conscious of when I'm watering the plant. Sometimes I go, oh, it's the watering cycle, I'll dump water in without checking it first, but you really need to reach your finger in, dig around the soil, make sure that your finger is completely dry before you water it again, just because it will be more prone to rotting during that transitional phase than it will once it's been established in that location. It's kind of just growing pains things. The next one might be a little bit more common than the other ones. I think other people have probably mentioned this one before in low light videos, but it is a Hoya Mathilde. Hoyas typically do like a lot of light, and the Hoya Mathilde absolutely can be scorched with sunlight if you want them to be, but they can also live in low light. I have this one in both. I have one sitting in quite a bright light in the other room, and then this is a little cutting that's just off to my side over here, and it gets very low light. It gets such little light that it essentially doesn't grow. Doesn't die though, just doesn't grow. Sometimes it would give me like 1 or 2 leaves every now and then, but for the most part, it's not growing because it's in such low light. But it's not dying, it's not losing leaves, it's still healthy, it's just not continuing to grow. And sometimes that's okay, especially if you have a massive collection. Sometimes having plants that aren't going to be massively fast growers and outgrowing the location that they're living in is kind of what you want in a plant. And for me, I just wanted a small plant that would stay small and fit in a tiny little shelf that I have and look cute. And it's doing exactly what I intended of it. The same goes for this next plant. This is my Hoya Polyneura. Just your basic green Hoya Polyneura. Again, this one I would say is a little bit more on the like harder to find, especially in Australia. Not as expensive as your variegated versions, but still, still a pretty penny, still a little bit hard to come by, but worth it. It's a really, really beautiful plant. It's also called like a fishtail Hoya, so I love the shape of the leaves and the way that it falls. But this, again, because it is so low in the way that it trails, this can fit into like little nooks and crannies and little places in your collection where you just want something different, something that brings some visual interest. And that's what this one brings for me in my plant room, in a shelf that can get essentially no top-down light. It can only get ambient light from around it because of the way that it is nooked in. Now this one has pretty good roots. I wouldn't say that the Hoya Polyneura is a plant that I've really mastered the care of yet. I do feel that it wants a chunkier soil than I'm providing to it. And every now and then I am getting like yellow leaves, but I think that's purely because I'm overwatering it. I still haven't quite mastered when this plant wants to be watered, and I fear it wants to be watered way, way less than I'm watering it. So still sort of working out this plant. I've also got a variegated Hoya Polyneura that I'm still, both of them are growing, both of them have new leaves, but I'm still trying to figure out both of them and how comfortable I feel with them. But either way, they're a great low light plant. I know it would grow a little bit faster if I put it in a higher light like I have with the other one, but I don't mind. The next one here I know is a pretty common plant, but the Philodendron Micans had to be on my list. I absolutely love it so much. This one quite literally lives in my bathroom with the tiniest little window that gets essentially no light at all. I would say this lives in the lowest light of all of the plants that I'm going to show you today. Yeah, I would say the absolute lowest light in all of the plants that I'm showing you today is where this one is currently living, and it's still growing and it's still living. As long as I don't overwater it. They hate sitting in water. So as long as I put like a little bit of a riser in the bottom, something plastic that keeps it from touching the base of the pot, it's happy and it will keep growing and living and thriving in its location. It's the exact same plant. It's a cuttings from the one that's behind me over here, which is also living in more of like a medium low light as well. But if you don't have a Micans, I feel like they're a very easy and like lush, beautiful plant that you could add to your collection and put in pretty much any lighting condition and it will be happy. The next plant here is quite a big one. This one is my Dracena Florida Beauty, and it is one that I don't see very often, and I don't see it in many people's collections. I guess it's a bit of a weird one, maybe because the way that it like stands up, it might be a bit of like an odd looking plant, but I really enjoy it. This one, again, lives anywhere. I feel like almost anywhere. I think this out of all the plants could live in the lowest light out of all of the ones that I've shown you. I have put it in god awful corners where it gets essentially no light and it's fine. Again, won't grow as fast. It definitely puts out more leaves when I move it to a slightly brighter location, but overall it's just such a happy plant. I've never had issues with pests. I've never had issues with overwatering or underwatering. It's just ultra resilient. It can go a really long time without water, but if I do accidentally give it a little bit too much water, it doesn't seem to complain either. So if you can find one, Dracena Florida Beauties, I love them. I think that they are the coolest plant, especially if you want like a statement plant in a really ugly low light corner. I think it would fill it out and look really cool. The next one I want to show you is a little bit newer to my collection, one that I'm very excited to have a part of my collection, and a crawler. This one is a Philodendron El Guapo. I just had to read the label because again, it is really new to my collection. But I bought it because I knew that it would be okay living in a lower light area. And I know people have some form of a hatred for crawlers, which I don't quite get. I love crawlers, and I know people don't like them because they don't think that you can grow them in round pots. I exclusively grow mine in round pots, so yeah, I don't mind crawlers, but this one might be one that you're not exactly gonna love, but I love them because since they're crawlers and not climbers, one, they don't need a moss pole, but two, they will be low to the ground. So if you have a lot of tall plants, this one can fill out the bottom spaces. Where I've got it currently in my collection, it's again a really small like nook to fit a pot in, so only a really small low pot can fit in there. But because it's a crawler, the leaves will all come out and it will just look beautiful as it grows as well. So it really does not bother me that it's a crawler, and I in fact purchased it because it's a crawler and because it doesn't mind being in a little bit of low light. I love the stunning foliage on this plant. I feel like it's a really elegant kind of foliage. The veining on the plant almost looks like shadows. It's just a really beautiful filler plant. The next plant's a bit big. Hold on. There we go. You still can't see it. There we go. This is my next low light plant. It is called a Dracena Jade, and it's a little bit dusty. I'm sorry if you can see how crusty and dusty it is, but again, it's because it sits in a really low light part of our house that doesn't have, you know, a lot of movement. So I guess it gets a little bit more dusty than the other plants in our collection. This one I water very infrequently, quite literally probably once a month or less, because it's in such a low light position. It does not need that much water, and Dracenas also don't like sitting in water, so it grows quite happily by my rocking chair and brings like a lot of fullness and brightness to an otherwise quite dingy corner. This one might be a bit of a hear me out, but I've also heard other creators mentioning that they also have theirs in quite low light. But this is my Anthurium Majestic, pure. I believe it's a pure Anthurium Majestic. And big, massive, beautiful leaves sitting in right in the back corner behind me. And it is pretty happy. It gives me a leaf every now and then. I actually think that it started giving me bigger leaves and probably like a better look when I put it into lower light. I used to have it right by the window getting bright indirect light, and I found its leaves became quite washed out, like really a light washed out green, and the leaves started turning the other way, so like pulling themselves backwards and like curling up oddly. So I actually found it was happier living in lower light, and that's probably closer to how it lives in nature as well. So I would suggest that maybe you could put your anthuriums, specifically the Magnificum, in a lower light, and they would probably thank you for it. And this last one is probably my favorite one to tell you about. It is a Syngonium Steyermarkii. Can bring you a little bit closer so you can see those beautiful leaves. It has such an interesting shape. This isn't even in its mature form. It will get even more mature. I have it growing up a moss pole, but it doesn't necessarily need one. It could just grow up a stake, but it is a climber. It will love some support if you could give it some support, but I have this sitting by my bed in the bedroom. And we usually have our curtains closed in that space. So second lowest light. I would say almost the lowest light on the list as well. And it's fine. It still has big leaves. It's still upsizing its leaves and getting bigger and more beautiful each time. But it's getting very, very, very little light. And in fact, when I gave it higher light in the old house, it didn't seem to enjoy it as much. So this one I would say is truly a low light loving plant as well. All right, and those were my 10 best low light plants that I have in my collection, or low light tolerant plants that I have in my collection. If you have any other great low light plants, feel free to drop them in the comments below. And if you stayed all the way till the end, can you drop a little cloud in the comments for our low light plants to let me know that you stuck around? Do you have any other suggestions for videos that you would like to see from me? Also let me know, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye.